My name is Brooke Walker, and for the Environmental Health Disaster Post, I will be presenting the Chernobyl disaster of 1986 in Chernobyl, Ukraine. The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station. The Chernobyl Nuclear Power Station was created with the purpose to generate electricity. It was located 10 miles northwest of the city of Chernobyl, Ukraine. It came online between 1977 and 1983. The station consisted of 4 reactors, and each reactor could produce 1,000 megawatts of electric power. The reactors created energy with the use of uranium dioxide fuel to heat water and create steam, which then drove the reactor turbines to generate electricity. The Chernobyl disaster of 1986 occurred on April 25th and 26th at the Chernobyl nuclear power station. The disaster consisted of several explosions which were triggered by a multitude of mistakes. The causes of the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. The technicians at the nuclear reactor Unit 4 attempted a poorly designed experiment. The reactor's power regulating system was shut down, along with the emergency safety system. Once it was shut down, the technicians removed control rods from the core while still allowing the reactor to run at 7% power. These multitude of mistakes led to an uncontrolled chain reaction that resulted in several massive explosions. The explosions caused a large fireball which blew the heavy steel and concrete lid off of the Unit 4 reactor. The fire then began to spread and ensued in the graphite reactor core. The explosion, the fire, and the removal of the lid led to a large amount of radioactive material being released into the atmosphere. The radioactive material, which was released into the atmosphere, was then being carried great distances by air currents and rainfall. A partial meltdown of the core also occurred from the radioactive material. After the Chernobyl disaster, an exclusion zone was created. The exclusion zone had a radius of about 18.6 miles centered on the nuclear power plant. It covered 1,017 square miles around the plant, but it was later expanded to 1,600 square miles. It expanded to include other heavily radiated areas outside the initial zone where effects of the radioactive material would be observed. The immediate effects of the Chernobyl accident of 1986 on humans. The day of the accident, 2 Chernobyl plant workers died from the explosion. 28 other individuals died from acute radiation syndrome a few weeks after the accident. The short-term effects on human health resulting from the Chernobyl disaster include radiation sickness and cataracts. Radiation sickness is a damage to one's body caused by a large dose of radiation exposure. Symptoms can include, but are not limited to, loss of appetite, fatigue, fever, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, skin damage, seizure, coma, and even death. Another short-term effect from the Chernobyl disaster is cataracts. Cataracts are caused by a buildup of protein that clouds the eye's lens, which leads to blurred vision and eventually blindness. However, from the radiation, it caused an increased dose of the ionizing radiation within the eye, which then led to cataracts. The late effects on the human health resulting from the Chernobyl disaster include psychosocial effects, leukemia, and thyroid cancer. Psychosocial effects include the increase in suicide, rampant alcoholism, apathy, which is lack of interest, enthusiasm, or concern, and medically unexplained increase in stress, depression, and anxiety. Cancers also include leukemia and thyroid cancer. Leukemia was seen in exposed workers, and thyroid cancer is most common in children and adolescents. It resulted in 5,000 thyroid cases with 15 fatalities after the Chernobyl accident. The Chernobyl disaster effects on the environment include urban areas and agricultural areas. For urban areas, radioactive material was deposited on open surfaces such as lawns, parks, roads, and buildings. It was contaminated due to air currents and contaminated rain carrying the radioactive materials. For agricultural areas, it contaminated agricultural plants and grazing animals. Thus, it went on to contaminate the milk produced by animals, more specifically cows. Other Chernobyl disaster effects on the environment include forest, bodies of water, plants, and animals. Forest foods such as mushroom, berries, and game contained one of the highest levels of radiation material. Animals were then affected by the radiation material because they eat this forest food. For bodies of water, radioactive material deposited in lakes, rivers, and water reservoirs. The amount of material was high, but it also decreased rapidly due to dilution and decay. Plants and animals were also affected by the Chernobyl disaster. Animals had an increase in mortality rates and a decrease in reproduction rates. Plants all responded differently, however, many did die. After the Chernobyl disaster occurred, cleanup then started. However, initially 350,000 individuals were evacuated as a result of the accident. But for Chernobyl today, resettlement of the area from which people relocated has begun and is still ongoing. These are the references for the Chernobyl disaster presentation I have presented. However, they are all listed under each PowerPoint slide and within each slide itself. Thank you.